Hello and welcome to the Griffin Poetry Prize shortlist. It's such a pleasure to be joined today by Roger Reeves, one of the shortlisted poets. And Roger, what inspired you to embark on this book, or do you indeed think in terms of books, or perhaps you think more in terms of poems?
Yeah, that's a great question. What inspired me was a poem. Actually, I was reading quite a bit of Miłosz at the time, Czesław Miłosz, and I was sort of writing in response to some of his work, as well as Szymborska. But I don't think about poems as books, right? Like I don't think in terms of books. I think in terms of let's write one good line, let's come up with good words, and then from there, what I'm actually looking for is a poem that sort of announces a new departure from that feels somewhat unsettling, um, or sort of casts me about in language in a way that I haven't been in language before, thinking in a way that I hadn't thought of just yet. And so for me, it's not about books. It's about one poem at a time, one line at a time, trying to just get that line.
I'm thrilled to hear you think about one line at a time. I try to encourage my own students to write one line at a time and not finish line one until, not move to line two until they've finished line one in some sense. Does that resonate with you at all?
It does. It does. One of the things I think is interesting about the poem is the line, right? And the fact that it ends or it breaks. And in some ways, that is like a chaos mechanism, right? So when you get to the end of one, sort of the next line is still rather mysterious. It's not like the sentence, which sort of I think is sort of perpetually moving forward, right? And so what I'm always interested in is I'm constantly interested in trying to be okay with not knowing what comes next, and sort of allowing the poem to dictate sort of what comes next. And of course, that's still coming from me, but I'm interested in that surprise because I'm thinking about the poem as something that can usher me into a new way of being, a new way of feeling, um, and so yeah, that really resonates with me in terms of moving forward.
So that one doesn't know where line two begins until we know where line one ends. And these two ideas are intimately connected.
Yes, yes, 100%. It's about shape too. Line one is going to teach you so much about the shape of line two, even if line two is completely different than line one. What we have though in that moment is a sort of like territory, right? I think about jazz and in the way in which jazz, there was a way of thinking about improvisation. Cornet Coleman talked about like territory and adventure. And so there's a way in which like the first line is kind of like the territory and you can adventure off in the second line, but you have to kind of know the territory that you're leaving.
Well, I'm fascinated by your notion of knowing the territory and how you line that up with what you described earlier on, which is the condition of not knowing what which territory you're entering. And perhaps it's some combination of the two where the really exciting things happen.
Yeah, it is. I think it is. I think it's sort of seeing possibility and beginning to sort of play in that possibility. And again, this is the thing about the poems, we're always revising them too, right? Like they're improvisational to some degree. And then in revision, uh, they begin to take a little bit more shape and become a little less improvisational. But nevertheless, inside of revision is sort of re-seeing the original idea, revising the original idea, having a new vision within something that seems as if one knows it already by a draft of a poem. So I'm always thinking.
Now, do you begin with an idea or do you discover what the idea is in the course of writing the poem?
I think there's many ways at it. One, I want to be moved by language. So to me, even if I see or hear something, I want the language to be the thing that catapults me into the poem because the language will take over, right? Like I think the language is freedom. I think the idea is a little bit of the tether, and so it's less about sort of idea or image sometimes, and it's more about sort of what is the language pointing me towards, and can I follow that? Can I just want to. I trust language a lot more than I trust ideas.
I'd love to hear one of the poems in this fabulous new collection. Is there one to which you'd like to point us on this occasion? There are so many that you might choose, but just stick with one for the moment.
Sure. I'll read Children Listen. It turns out, however, that I was deeply mistaken about the end of the world. The body in flames will not be the body in flames, but just a house fire ignored. The black sails of that solitary burning boat rubbing along the legs of lovers, flung into a Roman sky by a carousel. The lovers, too sick in their love to notice a man drenched in fire on a porch, or a child of flame mistaken for a dog, mistaken for a child running to tell of a bomb that did not knock before it entered in Gaza. It was glad tidings of abundant joy. In Kazimierz, a god is weeping in a window, one golden hand raised above his head as if he slipped on the slick rag of the future. Our human kindnesses, unremarkable as the flies, rubbing their legs together while standing on a slice of cantaloupe. Children, you were never meant to be human. You must be the grass. You must grow wildly over the graves.
What an extraordinary image of the fly on the cantaloupe. At which point did that come to you? Did it come to you pretty much in the as it occurs in the poem, or was it something that preceded the poem? Where did it begin?
Yeah, I think it's both, Paul. Like I think there's like an image bank that you have of like, oh, that's an interesting image. You don't use it because it's just like I can remember living in Brazil, living in Rio, and going to the fruit vendors and watching flies on the guava and on the cantaloupe, right? So I'm sure that's probably where, or even like thinking about my grandmother eating cantaloupe in the summer and the flies coming in through the screen door, right? I'm sure that's probably the bank. But as I'm writing, I wasn't that image wasn't sort of preordained for the poem. I think there's a way in which I was allowing the poem to come about. And I remember, I can tell you when I wrote that poem. I can tell you it was a Saturday evening. I was watching TV, and then all of a sudden, sort of heard the revision, and I ran upstairs and started writing that draft and getting to that moment of the flies on the cantaloupe. And yeah, so I think it's a both. I think we're always sort of observing the world, and the world is always with us. And our history and our past moving through the world is always with us. And the poem becomes an opportunity to sort of enliven the past with this language and sort of bring something that's from another time.
The moment you're describing there actually sounds like a moment from another time, what we might associate with a moment of inspiration. We perhaps tend not to think so much of in those terms these days. Maybe we should. It sounds as if you were overtaken by a force beyond you that you really had to follow.
Yeah, 100. I believe that. I believe I will stop in the middle of something. I will pull over on the side of the road. I will grab a receipt out of my wallet or anything and just begin jotting because I just always want to be available to poem and to poetry. I find it's a great way of living and being present.
Thank you so much for this. We really look forward to hearing more of your poems in Toronto on June the 7th in Kerner Hall. For the moment, thank you so much, Roger Reeves. We really appreciate your being with us.